So Fox News is going crazy over President Biden's plan to forgive some student loan debt. They're even calling it a cancerous idea to our culture. Is there any basis for this outrage? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So Fox News and the MAGA conservatives are going crazy over President Biden's plan to forgive some student loan debt. But is there any basis for their complaining? Let's check out this video here.
Will Cain is here, Fox and Friends weekend co-host in Focus now. Will, I can only imagine what you have to say about this, but the Wall Street Journal takes it on and basically makes the case that this is going to undermine all these alleged efforts by Congress to bring prices down for the American people, writing this: student loan forgiveness is an Inflation Expansion Act, but if he does forgive student debt, it will expose the hollowness of the Democrats' anti-inflation posturing. The party these days is about...
Okay, let's start with this. Now, I think it's important to note, number one, that there's been a pause on student loan payments now for a couple of years, dating back actually into the Trump administration. As a result, people who owe student loans haven't been making payments on their student loans for a number of years now. So if they continue the pause and forgive some portion of those student loans, it's not suddenly going to put a bunch of money into the pockets of these people, because they're just not going to have to be paying anymore the thing that they weren't already paying. So this is not inflationary. The second point to make here is that this is fully paid for. We'll talk more about this later on. Let's see more of this video.
Spending ever more money without restraint, except...
Okay, spending ever more money without restraint. I just can't hear this. It's such hypocrisy after the way that the Republicans and the Trump administration spent money like drunken sailors. The difference was they were giving all their money to the super wealthy. Now it's about time that somebody other than the super wealthy actually got some benefits from that, and that's what this is all about.
For defense. Well, it is that simple. Spending is what has gotten us here, and spending more will make matters worse. To you.
Okay, spending has gotten us here. Again, let's just have a reality check here. Is it possible that some of the interventions that were done to try to soften the blow of the COVID recession might have fueled some inflation? Absolutely. I've said that before. Is that the only cause of inflation? Absolutely not. I mean, guess what? There's higher inflation in England. They didn't have the COVID rescue package that we have here.
Yes, and so the operative word that you just used, Sandra, was alleged, when referring to the Inflation Reduction Act. This should do away with the concept that it was an Inflation Reduction Act. That was simply a fraud. That was mislabeling. That was bait and switch. That would have been outlawed. That is outlawed in most consumer transactions.
Let's have a little bit of a sense of perspective here. I mean, the Trump tax giveaway to the rich was called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. It had nothing to do with jobs. It had everything to do with making the ultra wealthy even wealthier, and that's what we found.
It was never the purpose of that act to be reduction in inflation. In fact, we knew because just days later, Sandra, almost every single media institution began to parrot the lines of the administration that it's actually a climate change bill. But look, we don't have to peer into their language use. Now we just look at their motivations, because this bill,
It was a climate change bill. I don't understand what's so outrageous about this. Does it have some impact on inflation? Yeah, I mean, the ability of Medicare to be able to negotiate the prices of prescriptions is actually going to be something that decreases the growth of the costs there. That's something that's a benefit in dealing with inflation. It's also going to increase taxes on the wealthy, which again, that's something that then means there's slightly less money out and about, which decreases inflation a little bit as well. So there were some benefits that are impacting the inflationary issue. But the fact of the matter is, as I've said before, this is primarily a climate bill with a side helping of health care.
Proposed bill would, as everyone recognizes, extend hyperinflate inflation, just showing that the motivations were never to actually help average.
Okay, let's have a reality check here because of the fact, as I said earlier, about this being paid for. Now, think back to the Inflation Reduction Act. Essentially, the Inflation Reduction Act increased taxes on the wealthy. Remember, only people earning more than $400,000 a year to the tune of more than $700 billion. Of that, about $400 billion of that was going to be spent on addressing climate change and extending to support to people to make it easier for them to afford healthcare. The other $300 billion was destined for deficit reduction. Well, as it turns out, how much is this going to cost? Well, it's going to cost about $300 billion. So you don't have to be a math genius to see here that that $300 billion, which are taxes on the wealthy, is going to be something that's going to benefit people in the middle class who are going to get a break on their student loans, something that actually impacts average people for once. That's what they're really upset about here.
Americans out there with the cost of groceries. It is to play to a constituency. And that constituency, in your lead-in, Sandra, what's fascinating to me, what really stood out, was that report for that statement from the NAACP.
Okay, let's talk about that statement from the NAACP. The NAACP was angry in their statement because the amount that was going to be forgiven wasn't bigger. They weren't saying that this wasn't something that was going to help people of color in this country. They were saying that they wanted more of it. What's more is this was before they had fully understood the fact that Biden actually had proposed a larger amount of loan forgiveness to the tune of $20,000 for people who had qualified for Pell Grants. Guess who qualifies for Pell Grants overwhelmingly? The poor and people of color.
And so the NAACP is recognizing, hey, this hurts the average black voter, and truthfully, it hurts the average American, meaning the blue-collar American, the non-college graduate American who will pay for this bill. And
again, who's paying for this bill? It's not the non-college graduate American. It's the super wealthy who are being taxed more under the Inflation Reduction Act.
so what's the constituency? I ask you. Increasingly,
what's the constituency? That would be more than 40 million Americans who are going to get some debt relief under this. That's a lot more people than are helped by Trump's tax giveaway to the ultra-wealthy.
It looks like some type of elite or aspirational elite, largely white, college-educated, liberal voter who wants their relief, who wants their support from the government bureaucracy.
Again, this is something that's going to benefit millions of people across the country. Not just people, by the way, who are college graduates, but also people who are unable to finish college and who still owe student loans, which those are really some of the people who deserve help more than anybody, in my opinion.
It's hard to digest this. We can put it up on the screen. College costs, real versus adjusted for inflation, and you just see these prices continually going higher. So, Will, if you do fall in the category in this country of somebody who's happy to have your debt waived and paid for by other Americans, you're going to have to deal with this sooner or later, whether it's your children or your grandchildren. What does this do to address those soaring costs? Why aren't we talking about that?
Okay. I really can't take it when the hypocrisy that you hear on Fox News just becomes so blatant. Because let's just remember back in the Trump administration, when you had Betsy DeVos as the head of the Department of Education, she basically did everything she could to try to stop efforts that were put in place by the Obama administration to try to stop some of these for-profit colleges from basically feeding off of vulnerable students. This is the area where most of the growth in college costs has occurred, which is in the for-profit colleges. And they're the ones who've been taking advantage of people. They also tend to have very, very low graduation rates. Those efforts, by the way, which Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump tried to undo so that people were able to continue to still essentially steal money from students, have been started up again under the Biden administration. So they are actually addressing the cost.
Look at that chart. That is actually stunning. And by the way, so Sandra, nothing I just said should be read as someone who thinks that what's going on in college with cost, and by the way, the return on investment of a college degree, is acceptable, that it's just, that it's appropriate market forces. It's most certainly not.
Okay, he's making a good point here. And what it is the fact that in many cases, the return on investment for college education is not what it should be. And he's right about that, by the way. And that just speaks to the fact that student loan forgiveness is probably something that should be done. Because we have to remember that the most recent college graduates who are coming out into the workforce right now did not get the full college experience. Most of them got it interrupted, had much of it online when they might have preferred to be in classes as a result of the pandemic. And really, since the economic crisis of 2008, you've seen any students who've come out into that not get the same kind of bump up in wages that their parents got. In fact, that generation is increasingly viewed as the first generation that is not going to be better off than their parents here in America. So we essentially need to give people who are the more recent graduates some relief so that they can try to kind of get their lives going and get some of this burden off of their backs.
And it's a basic law of economics that we should have understood by now. If the government subsidizes something and makes payment responsible for a third party, meaning the consumer and the seller aren't actually the true transaction there, you get rising costs. Healthcare, the exact same thing as college education, and it's hyperinflationary, just like education. So the appropriate.
Let's just have a reality check there for 1 second, because I think it's worth noting that actually the costs of Medicare are much lower than the costs paid by private health insurers. So much for the private sector being so awesome relative to government.
I've struggled with this, Sandra. What's the metaphor for forgiving college debt? It would be like someone who is addicted to heroin, who is going through horrendous withdrawals. And there's a certain person in the room who says, well, only thing we can do to do away with these withdrawals is give them another bump of heroin. So this bill...
All right, I almost hate to go here, but what he's talking about actually is a legitimate way of dealing with drug addiction, which is what's called harm reduction. That's the basis for giving people methadone, for example, that's been talked about, and other drugs that aim to essentially reduce the cravings that people have and allow them to get back to a normal life. And that's kind of the point here with loan reduction too, isn't it? I mean, we're trying to allow these college graduates to be able to get some of the benefits of their education that their parents got, aren't we? I mean, a big part of the reason, by the way, why college costs have been going up so high has been the disinvestment of government in college education. You can track almost exactly the increase in college costs at public schools along with the reduction in state investment in them. In fact, the school I teach at, which is considered a state school, only gets about 10% of its budget from the state at this point. Where does the rest of that come from? Well, it comes from the students and their families, obviously. So in some respects, what we're doing with this debt forgiveness is we're just starting to reverse some of this disinvestment that government has been engaging in really since the early 1980s.
Would only serve to hurt the long-term equation, which is it would rise the cost of college once again.
Because then the forgiveness down the road will have to be
bump to universities.
And bigger, to your point. And not only that, these far-left Democrats.
Now, wait, I think that we should be investing more in higher education. I think we should have free community college, for example. And there should be more support for higher education across the board. I mean, it's been shown repeatedly that higher education is a great investment for this country. And what's more is, despite the complaining here that you hear from these people, the data is clear that having a college degree means that on average, you're going to earn substantially more than people who do not have a college degree. Now, we can bicker about the specifics about that, but that is a fact. So enabling people to essentially be able to kind of get started on their careers by giving them some relief from this debt that's hanging over their heads is a good thing.
Some of these progressives, this isn't even enough for them. Congresswoman Cori Bush tweeted out this: student debt is a nearly $2 trillion crisis. POTUS must cancel student debt, all of it. And Senator Bernie Sanders will. His staff tweeted this out: Republicans will attack for giving $10,000 in means-tested student debt as ferociously as if Biden canceled all student debt.
Well, I guess we could say that Bernie Sanders' staff was right about that, because here they are attacking it. So there you go.
Think big or go home, says his staff. Cancel all of it, Will. To your point, where does this end? Final thought.
Well, it never ends.
Well, I can tell you where this ends. Hopefully this ends with the government spending more to support higher education the way it used to, and making college education affordable for families across the country again. That's where it ends.
It's because what do you do for the next generation, right? What about the next people that take on college debt? Do they get 10? It's a little bit like illegal immigration. You know, do you just continue to give out dreamer status and pathway to citizenship status to every wave of illegal immigrant? Do you give $10,000 in grants or for debt forgiveness to every generation of college student? You know, you can't, and it's just gonna. The point we're making is college prices will actually continue to go up.
The only way college prices will continue to go up is if the government continues to disinvest itself from higher education. If government starts investing again in higher education, then we'll be able to see college costs becoming more affordable again. That's really the issue.
Continue to be hyperinflationary because of these policies. Yeah. And then last point, Sandra, and it's not a hand-waving point, it's important. Culturally, what do you say to blue-collar people that didn't go to college and now they have to shoulder the tax burden for this? What do you say to all the people that actually paid off their college debt? That you're a rube, that you were stupid to pay?
Okay, I think this is a great point here. Number one, the people who have not gone to college, what we'd like to say to them is, well, we're trying to make it more affordable for you and your families to be able to go to college. Number two, what we're saying is that you're not paying for it. This is something being paid for by the people who earn more than $400,000 a year, as I described earlier in this video. And finally, for the people who did pay off their college debt, again, the issue here is that the more recent graduates have really been hobbled by the economy that they graduated into and by the effects of the pandemic most recently. I would say that this is the least we can do to try to give people some ability to get on with their lives and get out from under the burden of college debt.
Off your debt because, look, just wait for the government to come along to forgive it. I mean, this is a real cancerous idea to our culture.
And we will see where the president ultimately goes from this when we hear from him potentially later today. Will, thank you very much and great to see you.
I would say that the cancerous idea to our culture is the fact that we basically don't care about education here. Sad to say, but we need to shift the discussion away from whether we're going to forgive student loan debt, not forgive student loan debt, into a discussion of how we're going to get the government to invest more in higher education the way they did back in the 1960s and 1970s when college was affordable for everyone. Well, if you want to find out more about the whole student loan debt forgiveness issue, why don't you check out this video I did a while ago. I kind of lay out some of the pros and cons there. It might give you a little bit of a sense of the landscape out there. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.